The broadcast began like countless others. Panelists seated, studio lights bright, and the familiar scroll of breaking news along the bottom of the screen. JD Vance sat stiffly, ready to defend Trump against criticism he'd faced countless times. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett appeared calm, holding a folder she'd barely glanced at before the cameras turned on. Nobody in the studio quite knew what was coming, least of all Vance. Minutes in, as discussion turned to Trump's personal life, Jasmine shifted tone. With deliberate calm, she opened the folder, revealing documents and messages that had never surfaced publicly. Her voice remained steady as she outlined inconsistencies in Trump's public account of his marriage payments routed through shell companies, coordinated NDAs, and timelines that contradicted previous statements. The details were more precise than rumor. They were backed by receipts at first. Vance tried to laugh it off, dismissing her as another attention seeker. But Jasmine kept going, unshaken by the interruption. She named dates, cited dollar amounts, and described transactions that connected personal hush payments to broader financial dealings already under scrutiny. The studio quieted, the tension thick enough to feel. Vance's smile faded, replaced by a glare that grew sharper with each fact she read aloud. Then came the tipping point. Jasmine cited an email, dated and signed, suggesting Trump's legal team had pre-approved payments to keep details of marital disputes out of court filings. Disputes that, made public, could have derailed key moments of his campaign. Words weren't shouted, they were simply read, and that calm delivery made them land harder than any insult could have. Viewers at home saw Vance's composure vanish in real time. His reaction was immediate and messy, voice rising, face flushed, words tumbling over each other. He accused Jasmine of fabricating evidence, of defamation, of endangering national security. But the more his voice rose, the quieter Jasmine became, forcing the contrast into focus. On split screens, Vance's agitation was unmistakable, and Jasmine's steady gaze seemed only to deepen his frustration. Clips of the moment flooded social media within minutes. Audiences replayed not just the facts Jasmine presented, but the way Vance unraveled under pressure. His supporters called it passion, critics called it panic. But either way, the viral footage showed something undeniable. An advocate caught off guard by information too detailed to dismiss and too public to hide. The meltdown was no longer private, was part of the broadcast. What shocked many wasn't just the content of the secrets, but the preparation behind them. Jasmine hadn't stumbled upon rumor. She had gathered emails, transaction summaries, and corroborating statements. Legal analysts weighed in almost immediately, calling the evidence credible enough to raise serious questions if taken further. Suddenly, Vance's loudest protest sounded like desperation rather than defense, even as Vance demanded retraction and apology. Jasmine calmly declined. "If the facts are wrong, show us," she said, voice even and unhurried. That single sentence undercut hours of bluster. It shifted the burden of proof back onto him, and in the silence that followed, it became clear he had nothing concrete to offer in response. His anger did what denial could not. It confirmed the weight of what had been revealed by the end of the segment. The conversation wasn't about loyalty or partisanship anymore. It was about what Jasmine had brought to light. Whether people supported Trump or not, the evidence forced new questions. Even among those who dismissed the scandal, few could ignore the detail in her documents or the steadiness in her delivery. Vance's meltdown made it impossible to call the revelations trivial. News coverage the next morning captured the contrast. A politician shouting in defense of a friend and a lawyer quietly presenting documents that spoke louder than anger ever could. And for many, that contrast said as much about credibility as the facts themselves. In that studio, Jasmine Crockett's .com voice had turned private secrets into public knowledge and left her loudest critic caught on live television. No script to save him. In the aftermath, the broadcast replayed endlessly online, not because it was the loudest debate of the year, but because of how completely it flipped expectations. Viewers had tuned in expecting Jasmine to be the one under fire, yet within minutes, the focus turned to Vance's unraveling. His rising volume and shaking hands clashed so sharply against her measured tone that even those unfamiliar with the issue understood who was in control of the facts. Political strategists studied the clip frame by frame. They noted Jasmine never raised her voice, never mocked Vance, and never even looked surprised by his reaction. Her approach felt deliberate, as though she'd known the revelations would provoke him and had prepared not to engage in the shouting match that followed. That refusal to escalate turned his anger into a spotlight on itself, leaving him looking defensive rather than strong. Meanwhile, Jasmine's team quietly pointed out that the documents were only part of what they'd uncovered. While the media focused on the immediate drama, legal commentators speculated about potential investigations into campaign finance violations and misuse of charitable funds linked to silencing personal disputes. The conversation began to move beyond Vance's meltdown toward real consequences for those involved. JD Vance's allies quickly tried to recast the moment as unfair ambush. They claimed Jasmine had coordinated with media producers to embarrass him. But the accusation gained little traction outside partisan circles, because the documents themselves were verifiable and because his on-air reaction seemed so raw, so unscripted, that it rang true as genuine panic rather than staged outrage. What made the clip resonate wasn't just that secrets were exposed, but that the usual defense louder denials failed so completely. Jasmine didn't even argue back. She waited, let him vent, and then calmly repeated the facts. The simplicity of that strategist stand back, let evidence speak made the meltdown look like proof that the revelations had real substance behind them. In later interviews, Jasmine barely mentioned Vance's reaction at all. Asked if she'd expected him to go nuts, she shrugged and said only that she'd expected the truth to land hard. That refusal to personalize the conflict kept attention on the documents themselves, not on the shouting match others had tried to create. Her restraint deepened public interest in the material, making it harder to dismiss the revelations as political theater. For Vance, the damage went beyond that single night. The clip followed him into other interviews, replayed each time he spoke. About Trump, supporters still backed him. But the viral video left a mark. Not just that he defended Trump, but that he'd lost control so completely on camera. Critics seized on it as a sign that the truth had landed where denials failed. And even some allies privately admitted it looked worse than they'd feared. By week's end, the scandal had shifted from a story about loyalty to a story about facts. Jasmine's calm presence turned what could have been dismissed as gossip to evidence serious enough to spark calls for investigation. And in the process, she showed that the loudest voice isn't always the strongest. That sometimes the person who doesn't shout can move the conversation further than any slogan could. And so, what people remembered wasn't just Vance's angry defense or even the specific marriage secrets revealed. They remembered the quiet way Jasmine Crockett exposed them, steady, prepared, and unwilling to be drawn into shouting. And in that silence after his loudest outburst, the truth felt clearest because panic broadcast live became its own kind of confession.